I arrived at the signal house an hour after dusk, with the sea chewing the cliff and the rain coming down in polished chords, turning the road to a ribbon of black glass. The caretaker's key was wrapped in oilcloth and left under the third slate behind the porch, just as the email said. When I peeled it out, it was warm, as if someone had been holding it a moment before. Inside, a square room of old timber and salt, desk under a narrow window, brass instruments on the wall recording the weather's moods, a dented kettle on a small gas hob, a cot folded against a bookcase. The place had been a lighthouse keeper's station before the lamp was removed, and the cliff circumvented by a newer, brighter beacon down the coast. Now the signal house was a research outpost, humidity sensors, an old analog barograph that still traced the air's rise and fall on smoked paper, a radio that could pick up the fishing banter and weather bulletins. For a week, I was the relief monitor. Feed the data to the network, mind the diesel generator if the mains cut out, and keep an eye on the cliff path in case sightseers got too bold. I was here because the city felt too loud lately, too close, because my apartment had started to smell like coins and stale coffee, and I wanted air that tasted like iron. Because when I close my eyes on the tram, I see not the map of stops but someone's wet hair coiling across my lap. I don't tell anyone that part. I just say, I needed a week by the sea. I locked the door and shook out my coat. The rain pinned itself to the window in a fine, crawling veil. When the wind gusted, it blew sideways and slapped the glass, and 100 tiny streams raced down the pane in odd patterns, some merging, some refusing to touch. I boiled water and made tea. The gas flame hissed like hush-hush in a theater. From the far corner came the soft, metronomic tick of the barograph stylus moving, offering its slow heartbeat to the wall. I walked the room and touched the brass plates as if greeting old acquaintances, reading the stamped letters aloud, aneroid barometer, hygrometer, until my voice felt less like an intruder's sound. On the desk was a logbook, kept in the injunction-like hand of the previous monitor, a man named Fitzgerald. First page, Weatherfolk Training Notes. Do not open the door for anyone after midnight in rain. When the battery fails, the lens will fog. Wipe it with salt water, not a dry cloth. If she stands with her hands at her sides, she can be ignored. If she lifts them, do not lift yours. Below in smaller script, it doesn't matter that you don't believe this. Keep the door locked. I understand jokes written in grim ink. I smiled. A caretaker with a flair for folklore trying to startle the new person. Still, I ran my thumb down the line about doors and midnights and felt the place tilt, just slightly, as if I'd stepped on a loose board. It was past 11. I ate a sandwich with the paper still wrapped halfway around it, like a parenthesis I never closed, and set up the radio. The signal was good, the rain brawny enough to make its own static. A weather buoy somewhere far offshore intoned numbers in a tired, automated voice. The tea was hot and bitter and comfortingly bad. I let the barograph's soft tick-tick collude with the rain's varied percussion and almost slept sitting up. I woke disoriented to a sound that did not belong to the house. At first, it was only the rain. Then, beneath it, another rhythm, not the polite tap of branches, not the flex and relax of old wood, but a deliberate knock. 3 beats, knuckles on glass. I sat up. The window was a rectangle of moving gray. Another knock. The handle of the kettle trembled on the hob, a tiny silver shiver. I stood, the chair scolding the floor with a scrape, and felt an absurd gratitude for the logbook's notes, as if now I was in a story with instructions. The third knock came, and I realized it wasn't on the window. It was on the door. I didn't cross the room immediately. There is a kind of listening you do when your life suddenly depends on it, as if the air has hidden words in it, and you must parse them without missing any article. The rain gathered and slapped and gathered again. The clock above the desk counted. Something, distant or merely imagined, moved like cloth dragged across stone. "Who is it?" I asked, because it felt rude not to. No answer. Just 3 more knocks, each equidistant like dots in punctuation. The kind of knocking that, after it stops, leaves its shape in your chest. There's a peephole, I thought, and debated my relationship with horror movies, with the ways people disobey warnings in order to be eaten. But this was a house on a cliff in a storm. It was not impossible that someone had lost their way. I felt stupid and brave at once. I went to the door and put my eye to the fisheye glass. A face filled the circle. The fish has been caught looking. It was a woman's face, pale with the blue from the night, lashes stuck with rain. She was very close, as if the peephole itself had invited her, and the exaggeration of the lens made her eye vast and uncanny. But the strangest thing, the thing that stayed my hand from the deadbolt, was that she didn't appear to be breathing. Not held breath, not the soft mist at the nostrils. Just stillness, as if breath were a thing she had elected not to do anymore. Her hair was plastered to her head and neck. Her coat was soaked so thoroughly it had the dark, varnished look of wet bark. Her hands hung at her sides. Fitzgerald's note, unhelpful and unbidden, came up my spine. If she stands with her hands at her sides, she can be ignored. Ignored, as if she were weather. I leaned closer. The fisheye distorted things. People on porches looked like giants. Still, her pupils felt wrong, glassy as river stones. She turned her head not by degrees, but in a single, too smooth pivot, and looked straight into the peephole, into me. The raw animal in me wanted to run up the chimney. "Please," she mouthed, without sound. I took 2 steps back so quickly I almost fell. The room seemed to float back without me, as if I'd unmoored. My hand found the desk, the logbook's bristly paper under my palm. I looked at the clock, 12:03. I did not open the door. The knocking didn't resume, but the feeling of being watched circulated through the room like a draught. I turned the radio up until the buoy's numbers were company again. After a while, the worst of my fear dulled into a humming vigilance, a predator's low crafts. I boiled more water just to have something to do. I wrote in the logbook because writing is what we do when we want to prove to ourselves that we exist. Heard knocking on door. Visual on female outside. Did not open. The rain took on different shapes as the night wore on. Darting, beaded, thready, sheets that made the window a shower door. Once, a flash of lightning so bright it erased the room like a chalkboard, then restored it in an instant, leaving my eyes full of after-image. I slept badly. I dreamed of someone combing water through my hair with the slow inevitability of tides. In the morning, the sea had calmed into a lumpish gray, the rain a gentle, incessant thread. The world smelled like wet nails. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the woman until I opened the door to fetch in the crate of fuel tins and saw, just at the lip of the porch, 2 barefoot prints on the boards. The prints faced the door. The toes were splayed and pale. The wood around them was wet, obviously, but within each print the timber was nearly dry, as if something had pressed the rain away. I put the logbook on the porch rail and traced the prints with my eyes. There were no others, no approach, no retreat. "Okay," I said to the empty air. "Okay." The day occupied me. A network glitch required re-entering a list of station coordinates twice. The generator, perhaps offended by my urban hands, chose to cough off, then on, then hold with a sulking growl. I scrubbed the ringed mug that came with the house and was surprised at how satisfying the clean shine felt, as if I had arranged even one small thing against entropy. Small acts stave off dread. Also, food. I ate bread and a slab of cheese and an apple that tasted of autumn and damp cellar. I was climbing the narrow stairs to the sleeping loft above the desk when I saw the first note. It was on the landing wall, a fingernail width above my eye level. Someone had written 2 words with fingertip on the paint, in watered charcoal or something taken from the stove's ashpan. "Let in." I leaned close. Each letter had a ridge at its edge where wet fingertip had lifted away from the grit. Not a recent note, not old either. When I wiped one stroke with my thumb, the charcoal blurred and left a gray streak on my skin. "Fitzgerald?" I called to the house's silence, as if the previous caretaker had tucked the note in for future laughs. The quiet had a soaked quality, like wool holding rain. I went back down to the desk and flipped the logbook to older pages. The writing grew sharper, younger as I retreated. I found no other such notes, only the occasional remark in the margin. "Do not clean the drain on a storm day," or "It is never as far a walk to the fence as you think," which, taken out of context, could either be sensible advice or a poem composed by someone alone too long. The second night introduced itself with a long, low tone from the foghorn far down the coast. The tone made the windows tremble. The rain seemed to like it. It thickened, and the house responded with tiny ticks and whispers. the clever noises of old frames resisting an old enemy. At 12:01, I heard the first knock. 3 beats, polite, almost patient. I didn't go to the door. I went to the window by the desk and parted the old curtains with 2 fingers. There she was, a shade darker than the rain, standing at the edge of the porch light's reach. Her drenched coat leached a shine like fish skin. Her hair hung in ropes. Her hands were at her sides, standing like a supplicant who refuses to supplicate. The logbook lay open on the desk beside my hand. The pen sat like a small black anchor. I touched the page without looking down. The woman lifted her face, not all at once, as before, but in increments, and I saw that her lips were blue and cracked, though the rest of her was soaked. The unbreathing stillness of her chest upset me. The unblinking shine of her eyes upset me more. I imagined drowning so often in terrible dreams that seeing someone who looked drowned while standing upright felt like the opposite of sleep. The second knock came, and I flinched, because it wasn't on the door, but the glass I was peering through. The pain rattled inches from my cheek. She had come closer, without the intermediary of footsteps or time, and put her knuckles on the window with the considerate rhythm of someone asking to enter a bathroom you're occupying. Her hand left no smears. The rain slid around her skin as if repelled. "Please," her mouth shaped again through the glass. Not a whisper this time. I heard something, not voice exactly, but the soft scrape of air inside wet pipes. "Please let me in." I shook my head before I could remember all the reasons people die of kindness. I stepped back, and her eyes tracked me with a smoothness that turned my blood granular. "Why?" I asked, angry at myself for the curiosity, angrier at the way her presence turned my insides into a struck tuning fork. "Why should I?" She tilted her head, and the rain curved off her cheek in lines too clean to be natural. The room felt suddenly dry, not just arid, parched, as if someone had opened a kiln. My lips tightened against my teeth, my throat clicked when I swallowed. Behind me something else moved. It was subtle, like a forgotten garment breathing. The barograph ticked, the radio hummed. The house exhaled its usual damp sigh. But the thing behind me was moving, and it was not of the house. It had a quality I can only describe as evacuating. Wherever it slid, the air became thinner, scraped raw of its moisture. The hairs on my arms rose as if in warning. I turned. At first there was nothing but the wall and the framed chart of the coast currents, buckled with age. Then the buckling deepened. The glass over the chart fogged, then unfogged, in a single ripple, as if an invisible hand had wiped it. The fog did not turn to drops. It simply lifted, like a veil. The air in the room shivered. The woman outside hit the glass again, harder now, and this time her raised hand lay in the shape of a question against the window. The fingers pressed flat, then lifted, then pressed, as if interceding with the pain. She lifted both hands. The logbook line rose up in my chest like bile. "If she lifts them, do not lift yours." The thing behind me took a shape I could not look at directly. It had no edges, and too many. It felt like standing under a heat lamp, and knowing the bulb was sucking your water instead of warming you. The smell of the room changed. The iodine of the sea thinned to something like hot dust and old plaster. The kettle, cold on the hob, clinked as if the air heated it. "Let me in," the woman said, and her voice did not come from her mouth anymore, but from the rain. 100 tiny throats in the rain saying the same syllables, over and over, hushed and urgent. "Let main, let main, let main." "No," I said, to her, to it, to the idea that I might open my hand or my throat or my door to anything. No. The invisible shape behind me came closer. The skin on my forearms tightened until I thought I'd split. My eyes burned the way they do when you stare at a window too long and forget to blink. The printer on the desk chirped awake and spat a thin sheet of graph paper that curled in the hot air like a leaf. I did what people always do in stories, that thing that makes other people shout at the page I'm doing it now. I reached for the door, not to open it, God, not then, but to put my palm flat on it, to feel the barrier and remind myself that it was real. My palm landed on wood, and in the same instant, the ICU dryness reached my shoulder, and for a splinter of a second I could feel every microcrack in my skin, as if from the inside, an inventory of future bleeding. "Let me in," the rain said in 1,000 wires. The woman's face was the color of tidewater. She lifted both hands again and flattened them on the glass, identical to me. A mirror. A dare. I lifted mine. There was a moment of relief, not because the invisible heat withdrew, it didn't, but because the decision disastrously was made. The body likes decisiveness, the hinge likes to move. I turned the deadbolt and pulled. The door did not open. The door slammed open, and the rain came in like a curtain cut loose. The woman did not step across the threshold. The weather itself did, an animal with too many feet. It hit the shape in the room with a sound like salt in a pan. The hot, dry, invisible thing thrummed against it, buckled, pushed. The rain skated over it and under it. Steam rose where they touched and rolled away with a smell like singed hair and clean metal. The woman stood in the doorway, arms up, palms out, the posture of someone holding back a crowd. Her mouth was open. I could see a darkness far back in her throat that did not look like a human mouth's dark. The room was some other place for a moment. The floor a flooded stage, the air a war. The generator coughed and died in the first minute, then returned stuttering, then steadied. Lightning sought the edges of things and made them glow with a false saintliness. The chart of the coast currents curled and uncurled. The polished brass instruments bloomed with condensation and dimmed, in my mind only, like eyes closing. "Hold," she said, and though the rain carried the words, they were distinct now, not 1,000 whispers but a command. Hold it, not to me, to the water, to the old worshipped thing that falls from the sky. I held anyway. The door jerked in my hand like a hooked fish. The heat pressed in waves against my cheek and then was gone and then returned like a breath, like someone experimenting with your discomfort. I thought of Fitzgerald writing little warnings with a coal-smeared finger and hoping someone, someday, would be petty enough to obey. I thought of the city and its metallic thirst and the way glass resists and how much of our lives are made of doors and how we decide which ones to open and which to guard like saints. The heat snapped. It didn't recede so much as break. A pane of wrapped air shattering along lines I couldn't see. The window threw out a crack like a white thread. The kettle pinged. The steam in the room turned back into ordinary steam. The rain lost its voices and became only itself again. The woman stepped back from the threshold. Behind her, the dark was grainy with more rain. Her face was a relief map of exhaustion. Her hair clung as if it loved her too much. Her eyes, too bright now, as if rinsed. She lowered her hands to her sides and, with a small, respectful nod, backed away into the wet night. She was gone between one blink and the next, a dissolving silhouette, and the rain fell past the door as if nothing could ever have stood inside it. I shut the door slowly. The deadbolt slid home with that medieval certainty locks have when they believe in you. I leaned my forehead against the wood and laughed a brittle little laugh that nobody heard. Then I threw up in the sink, thoroughly and without poetry. When I could stand again, I looked around. A fine dust lay in a line down the center of the room, like someone had sifted ash while walking. I touched it. It was not ash. It did not smear. It sank. It was dry, untouchably dry, as if it rejected the oils of my skin. The boards around the line were wet. The line remained uncooperative. I coughed, and the dust shivered like something offended. I took a cup of seawater. I did not think to question why I had filled a cup with seawater, and poured it gently along the line. The water beaded like mercury, then spattered, then soaked and spread, and wherever it went, the fine dust darkened and settled with a faint hiss, so satisfyingly that I laughed again, less brittle, like someone remembering that humor is a kind of weather. I wrote a page in the logbook in a hand I did not quite recognize. The letters leaned in strange ways, struck through at too many places. They said, among a flood of other foolish things, "Do not let the room dry out. Do not wipe the windows unless with salt water. If she asks, open the door." I slept like someone who has been forgiven, even if they cannot name the sin. The days that followed looked like this. Rain in varying tempers, the radio reading numbers, the instruments giving me their brass faces, and a band of ordinary work turning beneath my hands like a tide meter. I did not see the woman again in sunlight. I saw her once in the afternoon when the sky went pewter. She was far down the path, looking toward the fence where the land gives up to air. She did not come nearer. We did not speak. She raised a hand, not both, and the rain sharpened around her as if cut on a lathe. On the fourth day, the signal house's window bore a new scratch like a vein of quartz running through glass. The chalk-insistent white of it displeased me. I tried not to touch it. The cup I'd used for seawater developed a ring inside that would not scrub away. On the sixth night, the knocking came again, not at midnight, but at 3 exactly. It had a new urgency, a quickening between beats, a child tugging a sleeve. I went to the door. I didn't look through the peephole. I opened it. The woman stood in the rain and half turned, as if it were not me but the sea she was addressing. Her hands were at her sides. Relief is a simple word for it, but that's what it felt like. Someone else is on shift now. She met my eyes. "It will return," she said. The rain spoke with her and in me. They always do. They like dry houses. They like dry throats. When it comes, do not use a cloth. Water only. Do not let it parch you. Do not. Here she smiled, and it was very human and very tired, and I would have followed a stranger like that anywhere. Write little jokes in the book for the next one. It confuses them. "Who are you?" I asked. She tilted her head. The rain beaded on her lashes like silver. "Sometimes," she said, "we are the weather." And she was gone. The last night was so quiet I could hear the runnels arranging themselves on the cliff. The wind took a different direction and rubbed the house another way. I slept. In my dream, a field of glass opened at my feet, and all those written cautions rose up like grasses, and somewhere a door kept opening and opening because someone had to. When I left the signal house on the 7th morning, the rain had slackened into a clean drizzle. The cliff path was a stitched scar. The book smelled of marine glue and survival. I wrote a final note, spare, because it felt important to be sparing, and left the key in its oilcloth shroud under the 3rd slate. On the drive back to the city, the road fogged where it crossed low ground, and the trees leaked their last thoughts. I passed a bus stop where a woman stood alone under a shelter and did not look at me as I went by. Her hair was dry. That night, in my apartment, the heat kicked on with its old clank and sigh. The radiators smoked dust and the rooms tasted like coins again. I went to the kitchen sink and turned the cold tap and let it run until the water tasted of metal and stone and then of nothing. I wet a cloth with it and thought of wiping my bathroom mirror. Then remembered. I leave the window open now, the smallest crack when it rains. The sill does not like it, but I do. I set a bowl of water under the plant I've always forgotten to water, and it leans toward the bowl as if listening. Sometimes, very late when the city has burrowed into its clicking dreams, I hear 3 soft knocks, not on my door. In my chest, somewhere between the sternum and the name of whatever it is that makes you you. They are not impatient. They do not frighten me as they should. I put my palm on my ribs to feel them answer. I'm here. I'm here. And once, walking home in a light, clean rain, I met a woman at the corner who lifted one hand as if in greeting. I lifted mine too before I remembered all the rules. She smiled. The gutter water whispered over the curb like someone practicing words. Behind her shoulder for a second, the air wavered with heat as if a door had just closed over something that prefers you dry. Then the rain stitched itself back together, and the city forgot, and I went on with my umbrella tilted wrong to catch as many drops as I could. Took the night shift at the Polder pump house because I needed money and quiet. The listing called it a temporary monitoring assignment. 1 week, 1 person. A metal box on a dike where rain goes to be counted and thrown back into the sea. By the time I find the service road, the sky is a lid. Rain moves across the fields in visible bands, a gray comb stroking the grass flat. The pump house sits alone like a stubborn tooth, square and low, a lantern on its roof blinking red to warn no one in particular. On one side, the polder, flat as a breath held too long. On the other, the canal, black and busy, grabbing every drop the pumps spit and hurrying it towards sluice gates and the ocean beyond. Inside smells of iron and cold coffee. The entrance opens directly into the control room. Steel desk, plastic chair, 2 monitors, a panel of big red and green buttons, a row of pressure gauges with needles that twitch whenever the pumps gulp. One wall is glass. Behind it is the engine hall, a cathedral of pipes and turbines and ladders, everything wet. A pale strip light turns each droplet into a twitch of white. I hang my jacket on a hook. Rain pops in the hood and then keeps going, faint and fine, the way it keeps talking to you after you've closed the door. A binder sits on the desk with a laminated cover. Hugim Radchap. Polder Station 7, Night Operator Log. Someone has drawn a little boat in the margin. Someone has crossed it out with a heavy line. There's a note stuck to the monitor with tape that's turned yellow. Check levels every 15. No visitors after 20. Do not open door in heavy rain. The last part makes me grin. The same bureaucrat who wrote that also listed the weather forecast. Rain, rain, rain. I pick up the radio just to feel less alone and say, Station 7 online. No one answers. The pumps make their own reply, a low, patient thrum. I settle. I pour instant coffee into a chipped mug and forget to add sugar. I watch the needles on the gauges wag from green toward orange and back again. Every time the rain strengthens, the pumps answer with a deeper throat clearing, a bass that finds your bones and waits there. The first subtle thing happens just before midnight. A tapping comes from the glass wall behind me. Not a knock, not the tick of thermal expansion, but a careful, deliberate tap, 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 tap. It's not loud. It's the sort of sound you'd hear if someone drummed dry nails on a pipe and was trying not to be caught. I turn. The engine hall is empty in the way rooms are never empty when there's machinery in them. Air moves, drips patter, a cable shivers as if remembering wind. Far below, the sump pit is a square of darker dark with a rope ladder vanishing into it. I tap my pen on the desk as if to answer. Nothing replies. Still, when I sit again, I move the chair an inch farther from the glass. At 0023, the radio hisses, not a voice. A long exhale of static like the rain has found its way into the frequency. The screen shows the polder water climbing toward the 80% line. Storm cells bloom on the radar in clover leaves of green. Somewhere far off, a siren whoops once, undecided. I write the time in the log and then my pen stumbles because the page is wet. A drop sits fatly on the paper. I look up at the ceiling for a leak. The panels are dry. Another drop freckles the log, then another. I drag the binder aside and find a row of tiny wet footprints where it had been. Bare. 5 toes each. Marching out from under the desk toward the glass wall, as if a small person stood in the sump, climbed the ladder, and crossed to have a look at the gauges. The pump kicks on to a higher gear. The desk shudders. I feel cold like a coin pushed into my palm. Condensation, I say to the room, because I am the sort of person who says things to rooms at night to see if the words make sense out loud. The footprints dry to invisible. I keep writing. At 1:10, something moves behind the fogged round window of the sump inspection hatch. Just a shadow, just a smudge against a smudge. I tell myself it's a coil of hose lifting in the swell, or a plastic bottle. When I hold my breath, the pumps breathe for me. Tap, 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 says the glass, polite as ever. I stand. The engine hall hums like a patient animal. I unlatch the glass door, step onto the metal catwalk, and walk toward the sump hatch. The catwalk's mesh flexes. A drop of water caught in one square falls through and disappears without the courtesy of a splash. The hatch is chest high, circular, bolted, with a little inset porthole of glass like a ship's eye. A crescent of moisture fogs the inside, wiped and re-wiped from within by something with the wrong number of fingers. I lean in and see myself, then only gray. Hello? I say. The exhaust fans are loud enough that I can pretend that's why I don't hear an answer. The tapping stops. Something else starts, a sound that evaporates almost as soon as it forms, humming. Not a tune, not even human. Something like a storm gutter learns a hymn. I go back to the desk because I am paid to keep numbers in ranges, not to name noises. I sit down and count the breathing of the pumps. Sometimes you can move fear along like a bubble in a pipe. Night operators call it purging. You bleed the line of nerves until only work remains. Out of habit, out of nowhere, I glance at the log binder's earlier pages. Different handwriting, different ink, same cramped hours. 2 nights ago, at 3:07, someone wrote, "She does not die in the rain." The words have been underlined twice. Water has lifted the ink at the edges like a wound that never closes. Great, I say, a comedian. But the words sit on the page like something heavy that pretends to be a joke and isn't. At 2:32, the outside door rattles. Hard. The monitors wobble in place. Someone on the step tries the handle twice, 3 times, patient. The note taped to the screen says, "Do not open door in heavy rain." I put my hand on the latch anyway. There's no peephole. The rain thrashes the building like it wants in. "Who is it?" I call. A woman answers, but only because the rain wants to be a woman for a moment. The voice arrives elongated by water, vowels stretched thin, consonants chewed. It's 3 words, repeated, pressed flat by the weight of falling. Let me in. Logic responds. If someone is out there, they will die if I leave them on the step. If no one is there, what dies when I open the door is the tidy world I'm supposed to keep tidy. I do not open the door. Go around, I shout, pointing at the side of the building as if the voice can see my hand. There's a leeward alcove. The latch stops shaking. The pumps, affronted at the interruption, grunt and dive deeper into their cadence. Silence from the door. Then, very soft, through the radio channel reserved for system alerts, a whisper like rain skittered through a wire. Good. I don't remember sitting. I don't remember my hand finding the log pen again. The next thing I know, my handwriting has begun to slant as if the desk is tilted. Strong inflow, pumps 2/3 active. Door, and then a streak where a drop fell. Between 3 and 04, the storm sits on us like a sleeping animal. The gauges live in the yellow. The radar paints more green on green until the whole screen is just variations of punished grass. I eat a sandwich without tasting it, and only notice it was salty when my mouth starts asking for water it isn't getting. Out in the engine hall, the fog on the sump porthole gathers, clears, gathers, clears. On the 3rd clearing, a face is there. At first it looks like my own. That's how reflections work in confined places. Then the face leans closer from the other side and flattens until the cheekbones ache to look at, the eyes distort into long ovals, the mouth becomes a line that can pretend to smile if it doesn't have to move. Wet hair plasters to wet forehead. The skin isn't the sallow of the dead, it's the bleached color of something that sits too long in moving water. She lifts her hand to the glass. She doesn't touch it. She holds it a centimeter away. Her fingers aren't wrong, they're just too pale and too calm. She is calm like the center of a whirlpool is calm. She waits with an expression that is not pleading and not angry and not anything that expects a human response at all. Into the radio, which I have left live without meaning to, a voice says, "Station 7, this is 1. Reading your levels. Maintain." It's a woman, the coordinator whose name was at the bottom of the job listing. Her voice carries that brisk upward tilt at the ends of sentences that makes every instruction sound like a favor. "You're alone out there, yeah?" "Yeah," I say. I look up. The face is gone. I hear tapping behind the glass again, polite as a teaspoon on porcelain. Someone tried the door. A pause. Static like breath. "Keep it shut in heavy rain," she says, the company line. "Everything okay?" "Define okay." She chuckles. "You're doing fine. Polder's holding. Don't let it climb to orange." A beat. "And hey, if you hear humming, that's air in the line." The humming that has threaded the last hour pauses as if to eavesdrop on its diagnosis. Then it resumes, sweet and determined. At 4:20, the rain shifts gear. It becomes something with sharp edges. The red light on the roof stutters and then goes dark as if embarrassed. The engine hall's bulbs hum louder. The pumps double their insistence. One gauge edge kisses orange and pops back with a sulky shiver. I stand to stretch and my knee touches a wet patch that wasn't there a moment ago, a slickness on the floor just to the right of the desk. I crouch and touch it. My finger comes up with water that smells faintly of algae and copper. The slick widened in the black seam between floor plates as I watched. I follow it with my eyes to the wall, and then along the wall to a thin crack at the corner where the concrete meets the glass. The water doesn't seep. It moves with purpose, a thread that knows where it is going. It reaches the sump hatch and mounts it in a sheet, like a hand testing a sleeping face. She does not die in the rain, I think, and the thought does not feel like mine anymore. By 05, fatigue sits on me like an older sibling. The coffee is tepid. The radio is quiet except for the sound of a woman breathing far away. A strange calm installs itself. There are long minutes where nothing happens, where I can pretend that the face, the footprints, the words in the log were condensation and boredom. The pumps purr like big cats. The glass wall is just a wall. And then, because calm exists only to be broken, the building shudders as if something has clamped 2 hands on it and shaken once to hear what rattles. The emergency light above the sump hatch kicks on. It's red. For a heartbeat, the engine hall looks like the inside of an eyelid. The hatch bolts turn. They don't spin, they don't creep, they turn. Like an invisible wrench has fitted itself over each and given a quarter twist. The first makes a cracking sound like an ankle. The second squeals. The third freezes halfway, argues, gives. The fourth resists. The fifth refuses. I find myself already on the catwalk with my hand on the manual override lever that locks the bolts. My palm skids off the wet metal. The lever is slick, the coating worn down to smooth. I try again. The building shakes a second time. The lever drops half a notch under its own weight. On the radio, Station 7, the coordinator is awake now. She's put on her work voice, the one that makes other people sit up straight. Talk to me. The sump hatch, I say. My mouth tastes of pennies. Look, can someone be down there? Negative, she says. No hesitation. No one scheduled. Do not open that hatch. It's opening itself. Then stop it. I don't ask how. I hook both hands over the lever and hang. My boots leave the catwalk for a moment. The lever does not move. It's not one lever versus one me. It's a whole column of soaked, committed air pushing back from the other side. Tap, 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 says the glass beside my head, to get my attention, like a child at a window. I turn. She's an arm's length away on the other side of the glass wall. Not the sump porthole now, not a face framed by a circle, but the whole of her. A woman standing on the metal grating inside the engine hall, hair lying on her like heavy thread, dress moving in the drafts like wet paper. Water runs down her without seeming to arrive anywhere. She lifts one finger and points, past me, past the hatch, past the lever, to the panel by the desk. The big red stop button for pump 3. No, the coordinator says in my ear. She's watching my feed. She can see where I'm looking. Do not do that. If you stop 3, the levels go into orange and we fail the gate at 6. You'll flood the road. The woman shakes her head very slightly, still pointing. The stop button is bright with rain light. Who is she? I ask, and for once I want someone else to give me the story people pass along as a joke but hold like a talisman. A long pause. Then, keep the door shut in heavy rain, the coordinator says, which is not a story. It's the sort of lie that uses a rule as a shield. I let go of the lever. The hatch bolts turn another quarter. The story comes from somewhere else instead. The red emergency light makes everything look older. In that light I can see abandoned foundations under the waterline, the stub of a steeple, a line of willow stumps, a road that remembers where it went with the stubbornness of the drowned. The engineer's drawings pinned in the binder, outflow, inflow, pressure curves, become recipes, how to bury a town in weather and math, how to never let it dry enough to rot or rise. She does not die in the rain, I say out loud. The woman blinks. The rain climbs the glass in patient veins. Don't romanticize it, the coordinator snaps. You're a contractor, not a priest. You quit pump 3 and I've got 3 farms underwater and an old dike that doesn't like to be tested. She wants it stopped, I say. If I stop it, what happens? She takes you, the coordinator says evenly. Or she goes. Or she fails. The point is, we don't do folklore experiments with public infrastructure. Keep the water moving. The last bolt gives. The hatch stares at me like an eye that forgot how to close. Cold air breathes up, the kind that lives in places where sunlight never reaches. My teeth ache. The woman gestures again, softer. Not a command. A suggestion from someone who has practiced patience longer than I have practiced anything. The radio falls silent, as if to lend us the kind of privacy that only people about to make mistakes deserve. I hit the red button. The engine hall doesn't stop, it hiccups. The 3 big pumps stagger in their rhythm. The gauges jump like scared horses. The apology I almost offer the coordinator evaporates when the sump makes a sound I have never heard a building make. A sigh, relieved and tired and incredulous. Water surges outward from the hatch, up and up as if something had been held down a long time and has finally been asked to stand. It hits my chest like a door. I grab the rail. The woman does not move. She is the eye in the familiar now, unblinking, and in that eye something passes through the room that has nothing to do with flow rates, cold that is not temperature, distance that is not space. The hair along my arms teaches itself to listen. The door rattles again, this time not a try at the latch, a beating, fists, shoulders, a voice. A man, then 2, shouting words that batter the metal flatter than the rain did. Open up, Station 7, open up now. The crew, the coordinator says, relieved. They were close. They'll lock that hatch. Hold. The woman turns her face toward the door. She looks at it the way people look at a clock they are waiting to chime. Without looking at me, without moving her lips, she says a sentence that reaches me through the pumps and the rain and the radio. I do not die in the rain. You do not live without it. And then she is gone. Not vanishing like smoke. Gone like she stepped into a thin place and remembered she had somewhere else to be. The men outside make the door into a drum. I slap the latch up. Rain jumps in, jubilant and rude. Two figures in yellow coats burst through, skidding on wet metal. One carries a hook. The other goes straight to the panel and hammers pump 3's restart. I surprise myself. I plant my hand over the button. Wait, move, he says. His face is invisible under the drip brim, his mouth a line, his jaw clenched like a hinge that needs oil. He is younger than the voice in my ear and older than me. We're not drowning a road because you didn't like the ghost tour. The man with the hook points at the hatch. The bolts are all undone now, all of them yawning their stupid mouths. He shoves the hook into the notch and drags. The hatch skates half closed. Something under it pushes back. The metal sings like two knives. Help, he snaps. I put my shoulder against the cool round and shove. The hatch comes down a quarter turn, another eighth, angry. Under our feet, pumps we did not stop stomp the water into obedience. The red light pretends to be the sun. The radio has gone silent enough to be shame. We get it closed. The man with the hook throws the lock bar over and hammers the pin down with the back of the hook until the head vibrates in his hands. The younger man stabs the pump 3 button. The system complains, thinks about it, relents. Somewhere deeper than we can see, water resumes the shape we demand of it. On the panel, the gauges slink back toward green. On my tongue, the taste of copper fades. You good? The older man pants, bending with his hands on his knees. Drops slide off his cap and explode on the grating. You hear her? I look at him with my mouth already forming the question I want to ask. Who is she? But the way he says her, unfussy, with the settled cadence of prayer said not to be heard by a god, makes me swallow it. She doesn't die in the rain, I say instead. None of us do, he says. It isn't a joke. He touches the hatch, not affectionately, not with disgust, but the way you might touch a sleeping dog you expect to wake. You keep the pumps on. You keep the doors shut. You don't answer if she asks. That's the whole job. He leaves as quickly as he came. The other man nods at me once without making me a person in his eyes and follows. The door shuts. The building is its old, humming self. The red light on the roof remembers how to blink. I sit in the plastic chair and watch a drip race another on the window and lose. I write in the log. 0528 crew assist, hatch secured. Pump 3 restart. All green. I almost add the sentence that has been traveling through the building longer than any of us have lived. I don't. The page doesn't need more ink doing what rain already does better. Dawn arrives as an argument. The horizon wins slowly. The storm thins enough to see where land ends. The fields look like fresh scars. The canal looks relieved. A heron lifts away from the sluice, ashamed of how long its legs are. My relief doesn't come at 8. The coordinator radios at 7 and says with that bright upward curl, "Looks like you've got the hang of it. Can you stay another night?" I almost say no. Then I look at the glass wall and the hatch and the panel and the rain that is back to talking fast instead of shouting, and I think of a woman whose mouth barely moved and whose words found me anyway. I think of my body, of what the rain does to it, of what absence does. Yeah, I say, I can stay. I sleep in the little office in the back on a mattress that remembers too many spines. I dream of a church where the hymn is only the roof leaking in 8 places. I dream of a road drowned into a line of bubbles that refuse to burst because something under them always needs air. I dream I open a door in heavy rain and find the sea standing on the step, polite as a guest. When I wake, it's to the sound of gentle water talking to metal. For 1 second, I can't tell if it's the bathroom tap, the pumps, the canal, the sky. Then I realize it's all of them. The world settled back into the only conversation it knows how to have. On my way to the desk, I touch the hatch. It's cold enough that the pad of my thumb leaves perfect fog. On the fog, I write nothing. The hatch does not write back. This is the shape of it then, not victory, not a haunting dealt with and filed. A job, a rhythm. A building with 2 rules and a sentence carved in the air where paper can't keep it. She does not die in the rain. If there is a twist, it is that I am the only part of the system that believes itself optional. At 20:07, the door rattles again. I keep it shut. At 1:13, the tapping resumes. I tap back. At 3:30, the humming fills the gaps in the machinery and makes a song that reminds me of nothing, and therefore of everything. I write the hours and the levels and the names of the men who come when bolts think for themselves. On the 3rd night, when the storm leans heavy enough to crack the world's back, I see her again in the sump porthole. She presses her hand to the glass without touching. She tilts her head toward the panel, not to instruct, but to remind. I nod. She blinks. We stand like that for a cycle of the pumps, which is longer than you'd think. I still don't know what she wants. Release, revenge, return. But I know this. If she asked, I would open the door in heavy rain. The threat is not her. The threat is what walks when everything dries. Outside, the red light on the roof blinks. Blink, blink, blink. It's not warning, not exactly. It's a heartbeat, ordinary and essential. I listen to it and the pumps and the rain and the breath I forgot I was holding, and I tell myself a story that is not quite a lie. As long as it rains, we are not dead. It rained the first night I moved in. A clean, curtain-thin rain that slicked the street and lifted the smell of wet leaves and old brick from the row of houses. The boxes I'd carried inside were stacked like beige monoliths in my living room, all of them softening around the edges from humidity. I'd rented the place sight unseen, a friend of a friend. And by the time I found the right key on the ring and shouldered past the swollen door, the rain had intensified to a steady hiss. The house felt hollow. Every footfall came back to me from high in the stairwell like I disturbed someone's nap. I opened 2 windows to let the damp spring cool in, then shut them again because the rain angled in and tattooed the sill. I made tea. I stood, sipping, in the glow of a lamp on the floor, and watched the across-the-street house through a sheer lace curtain I hadn't yet taken down. She stood in the front window, an old woman, as still as a photograph, with the light behind her like a ghost's halo. She had a small, round silhouette, puffed shoulders, a high collar, and one pale hand pressed flat to the glass. It wasn't the seeing of her that set my nerves humming like wet wires. It was the feeling that she had been waiting for me, that she had known to expect me in this house at this hour and in this rain. I lifted my hand without meaning to, a reflexive hello, but she didn't wave. She held up 2 fingers, then slowly brought them to her lips, a hush gesture. Don't speak. I let the curtain fall and smiled to myself, because it felt foolish to be unsettled by a neighbor. Rain makes people dramatic, that's all. The house settled around me, old wood expanding with damp pipes clanging somewhere like caged metal. I ate noodles out of the pot and lay on a blanket on the floor and tried to read. Now and then, I'd catch a shape moving in my periphery, no more than the headlights of distant cars sliding down the street, the rain toggling between steady and sudden bursts. Sometime after midnight, the tapping began. At first I thought branches, but there were no trees close enough to reach the windows. The tapping was quick, precise, like fingernails on glass. A pattern. I propped myself on an elbow and heard it again at the front window, the one with the lace curtain. Tap, 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 tap. Nothing like the scatter of rain. It sounded intentional. I told myself it was just a gutter drip. I told myself lots of things, none of which kept me from sliding my feet into my shoes and crossing the uneven wood floor to lift the curtain with 2 fingers. No one stood outside. The street was an erased photograph. Rain blurring the house across the way, streetlight caught in beads on a sagged wire. The old woman's window was dark now. My own reflection trembled in the glass, as if I couldn't keep myself still. Get a grip, I said, because saying it made me feel better, and that's what people do when they are alone in a new place and it's raining. It took an hour, or maybe a minute, to decide I was too keyed up to sleep. I rolled onto my side and blinked at the ceiling until the tapping began again, but softer, from the kitchen this time. Then the sink gave a glutted burp, like a throat clearing. I went in with my phone's flashlight. The sink was dry. The voice of the rain on the window over it made everything else sound like whispers. I was grinning when I went back to my makeshift bed on the living room floor, grinning at myself, at the house, at how my heart could flutter like a moth for so little reason. It's only water and wood. It's only settling and seep. The city's a chorus, and you're the new, cautious ear. So when my phone rang, private number flashing up in the wet dark, I answered on the first chirp without thinking, relieved for human sound. I heard only rain. Not static, rain very close, as if the microphone had been held under a gutter's tongue. I waited there in the silence of my unfilled house, the phone warm to my cheek, and listened to the sound of someone else's downpour until the call cut, and I was alone again with my breathing. The old woman returned to the window sometime before dawn. I had been drifting in that shallow water between waking and sleep, where your body forgets to pin you in place, when a feeling like awareness, the sudden certainty that I was no longer alone, made me sit up. Her hand was on the glass again. She had written something in the fog on her side of the window, words I couldn't read from here. But I recognized the motion of writing, her little hand dipping and curling, her shoulders tight with effort. And though I couldn't hear her through the rain, I knew what her mouth was doing. Shh. Morning came gray and gentle. The street wore last night's rain like a sheen of sweat. I found the small mailbox key on my ring and stepped outside in my t-shirt and jeans and let the air cool my skin. The house across the street looked blandly innocent in daylight. No movement at its windows. Shrubs at its base looked half drowned and somehow delighted by it. "Morning," said a voice, and I turned to find a man on the sidewalk, 60s perhaps, with a post office cap and the patient face of someone who has walked this route for years. "Morning," I said. "New neighbor," he said, by way of pleasantry. "You're in the old Laird place. Roof will need attention. Rain leans on it in a storm." "Good to know." He glanced past me at the house across from mine, his mouth thinned. "Mrs. Hargreaves is still there?" "I think so," I said. I saw someone at the window last night." He nodded like that wasn't unexpected. "Keeps to herself. Husband died ages ago. It's the kind of house that remembers things." "What things?" He shrugged, as if he didn't want to admit belief thinned in daylight. "Storms change how sound travels. You know? You hear folks that aren't near." "I got a call," I said before I could decide not to. He narrowed his eyes. "Phone lines sag in the wet." I laughed. He didn't. He tipped his cap and went on, and the daylight pressed out the weirdness like a crease smoothed with a hand. I found 3 pieces of mail, 2 circulars and a small envelope without a stamp. The envelope was wrinkled, like it had been carried in a damp pocket too long. No return address. My name in soft pencil. Inside, on yellowed paper, were 4 words written in a spidery hand. "Do not answer it." I looked up without meaning to. The across-the-street window was empty. My house's reflection hung in the glass, a pale ghost of a house, and me standing in the front of it, small and for a moment unfamiliar. I stuffed the note into my back pocket and told myself it was some kid's idea of a joke. I told myself a lot of things as I spent that day building little islands out of furniture and boxes, a couch raft here, a table harbor there. The rain faded by afternoon. The air felt rinsed. When I showered, the pipes banged like someone was knocking at the walls to be let in. As the mirror fogged, I watched the warped version of my face taking a breath. A drop fell from the ceiling and struck my bare shoulder, cold enough to make me flinch. That's all it took, that small drop. I wiped a circle in the mirror to see my eyes. In the fogged ring around the circle, letters trembled into view, as if they had always been there, waiting for steam. "Hello," then my name. I did not breathe for a handful of heartbeats. I didn't touch the glass. I grabbed a towel and went downstairs, the towel trailing water, and stood in the center of my living room and listened until my breathing sounded like sobbing, and the house sounded like it was holding its breath. I didn't sleep that night. The rain returned right after nightfall, as if it had a schedule to keep. It was the small hours when the tapping came again, not at the window this time, but at the front door. 4 taps, not a knock, a patient, mechanical kind of request. I brought my eye to the peephole. Water freckled the lens. A pale oval hovered there, too close. A face. An eye. "Don't," said a voice from the other side, very close, made thin by the wood between us. "Don't open it. Don't say a thing." It was the old woman from across the street. The porch light made her hair a frizzed halo. She kept her face near the door like a conspirator and listened the way you listen for a child's breathing in the next room. "It listens in the rain," she whispered. "It learned your name. Don't give it anything else." "What are you talking about?" I said, and then flinched, because that was talking, and my name was on my mail and on my lease and in the mirror, and maybe it was everywhere now. She winced at my voice and looked at the gutters. "It has a way in," she said, with an urgency that made me picture something small and black and many-jointed scuttling under doorways. "I keep it on a short chain, but your house," she touched the wood with her fingertips. "Not yet." I pulled the door open, despite everything she'd said, because the fear of being rude turns out to be stronger in me than sanity. She stepped back, startled, but didn't cross the threshold. Rain made capsules on her lashes. Look," I said, absurdly. "Do you want to come in out of the rain?" She shook her head. "You must not invite me," she said. "It counts. It hears invitation and takes it for itself." A car hissed by, its tires on the wet street whispering. Her head flicked toward the sound like an animal's. "Close it," she said. "Shut the windows. Put salt at the doors. And if it taps on the glass and says it's me, do not answer it." She reached, quick as a pickpocket, and tucked something into my palm. A small jar. It had been painted red, like nail polish. Wax sealed the lid. It felt heavy for its size, as if it held a heart. "What is this?" I asked, but she had already turned away, hurrying toward her own house with surprising speed, the rain smearing her into a streak of light and gray. The jar sat on my kitchen table like a dare. I didn't open it. I traced the thick red paint with a finger and felt a child's small frustration. That she hadn't explained the rules in order, that she hadn't drawn me a map of this, that I was supposed to trust a stranger because it was raining and because a mirror knew my name. I salted the sills because it cost me nothing. I shut the windows. I left the jar unopened because the instinct to do so rang like metal in my bones. I fell asleep on the couch at dawn, the jar on the table across from me, an insect suspended in red glass. Days passed. When it rained, the old woman stood at her window. When the clouds parted, her house seemed to empty of people and sound. Sometimes, in clear weather, I forgot all about it. I went to work. I learned which step creaked on the stairs and where to place my heel to quiet it. I made a ritual of turning the 3-drawer pulls on the sideboard before bed, because one stuck if you didn't. Small, normal comforts. Then one evening, a storm unrolled over the neighborhood like they do in summer, sudden and clean. I was reading on the couch with all the lamps on when the first drops pecked the glass. I did not look across the street. I did not. I kept reading the same paragraph and not understanding a word. The house sighed and tightened itself. The refrigerator motor hummed. The rain thickened. I heard the first tap-tap. At the back of the house, where the kitchen window faced a narrow alley that always smelled faintly of standing water. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. I did not get up. The lights flickered once and then held steady. The tap came again. The sound of my name, damp and close, came under the kitchen door. I did get up then, because fear, like any pressure, seeks release in motion. I took the red-painted jar from its place on the table. I held it in both hands. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and said, to the empty air, "I am not opening the door." The tapping stopped. "Good," said a voice behind me, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the jar. The old woman stood in my back doorway, not inside, not crossing the threshold, only a pale oval in the rain. "You're learning. How did you?" The lights died. The kitchen fell into thick, touchable dark. The rain sounded suddenly inside the walls, not just on them, inside. A wet breathing threaded through the house, a noise like someone swallowing and swallowing. The old woman hissed, "It's under your eaves. Keep your feet dry." Something cold moved over my toes. I looked down. Water. Only water, I thought at first, slithering across the tile like it had a destination. It touched the rubber heel of my shoe and I felt it register me. It moved again, up, into the edges of the sole, the way a vine finds a seam in brick. "Up," the old woman said. She thrust a hand into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bag that clinked, the sound of glass or bells. She scattered something that shone dully in the dark onto the floor between us. "Stand there. Don't step out of the circle." "What circle?" She made it quickly, fingers sure, small things chiming as they fell, bits of bent silver wire, glass beads, what looked like nails. "This," she said, and she looked as frightened as I felt, which did not help. The wet breathing became a steady, human exhale at my back. I did not turn around. Fear feels like helium in my blood. My body wanted desperately not to be my body. When the breath came again, closer, I felt it in my hair. "It wants the jar," the old woman said. "Don't give it the jar." "What's in it?" "Rain," she said. "Enough to keep it fed without feeding on you." The breath at my back made a stronger sound, like a word rounded by water. My name came out slurred by the weight of it. "Let me in." The mouth that said it didn't know how to shape human syllables. It had learned from eaves and drains. The small circle of junk on the floor rang softly like a wind chime without wind. The old woman took a step closer, still careful not to cross the threshold. "Listen to me," she said. "I'll tell you as quick as I can. It rode the river into this neighborhood the year my husband died. It sits in the rafters when the gutters fill. It drinks the backs of your necks while you sleep. I caught a bit of it once in a storm like this and taught it to take what I give. Pricks at the window? That's me, telling it no. You. You came with your windows open and your mouth open and your heart open." Another step of wet reached under the circle. The beads jumped, the nails lifted and lay down again. The lights flickered. In the birthing of that brief light, I saw something on the floor where the water was, a long, sleek black thing, thin as a ribbon, with a mouth at the end like a lamprey's ring of teeth. The lights died again, and I swallowed the sound in my throat. "It will ask," the old woman said. "It will say please. It will knock like a friend. It will use voices. It will use me if it knows you'll answer me." A small hand tapped at the kitchen window. It was not the old woman's hand. It was small and smooth and bluish under the rain, like a hand made of sky. It tapped the glass with a fingernail that made a childish, polite sound. The sound a neighbor might make, a child, a friend. I made the mistake of looking. Shapes smear in rain. A face smeared there, a sweet oval, eyes large and liquid. When it smiled, the mouth was wrong, too round, too bright with teeth. "Please," it tried. "It's cold." I held the jar tighter. "Open," it said, and a second mouth spoke from the drain, and the wet breathing at my back said it too. And above us the gutters gurgled the same syllable like a chorus. "Open, open, open." And I thought of how I had opened the door on the old woman that first night, just because I had been taught not to keep people in the rain. I thought of the mirror writing my name without permission. "No," I said. The small circle of beads and bent wire chimed again, brighter this time, and the cold on my feet retreated like a tide unwillingly pulled. "How do we get rid of it?" I asked. "We don't," the old woman said and smiled, and her smile was terrible. Not cruel, but weary, the smile of someone who has fed a monster to keep worse at bay. "We keep it. We don't let it grow teeth it can use." "Forever?" "Yes," she said, approving. "Forever is the word for this sort of work." The lights came back in a blush and then steadied. In that light, for the first time, I saw my kitchen properly. The water line on the baseboards, the small parade of wet footprints back and forth, bare, my size, and not my stride. The old woman saw where my eyes had gone and nodded once, like this confirmed her theory of me. "We should set your lines now," she said, brisk again, "before it sulks back to the drains." "My what?" "Bells," she said. "Nails. Salt if you have it. Threads across thresholds. And that jar, keep it near the back door. When the rain's heavy, set it outside for a few breaths, then bring it in. But never open it. Never break it. If it breaks, you run to me." "Why me?" I asked, because I needed to be a person for a second, not a function. "Because it likes you," she said. "Because it knows your name. Because I can't keep it alone anymore." She did step inside then, one shoe only, onto the mat, careful not to wet the floor more than necessary, and set down a small tin. Inside were bells no bigger than the end of my little finger, each with a thread tied to its loop. She worked with efficiency that told me how many times she had done this. I followed her instructions, because I wanted very much to be a person who had instructions as if instruction was a raft. We strung bells at the corners of windows. We laid the bent nails in a pattern around the drains. We salted sills. We sat the red jar on a little saucer so its sweating did not mark the wood. We worked while the rain steadily talked, and the house listened like a patient audience that had heard this story before. By the time we finished, the rain had softened to a fine mist. The old woman stood in my kitchen and looked around with a proprietary air, like a midwife regarding a baby that had survived a rough passage. "I'll be across the street," she said. "Watching." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more sincerely than I've meant anything. She nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't want me to mistake this for kindness only. It was duty and debt and some other word I didn't yet know. She left. The house breathed with me. I slept, finally, at the stub of dawn, and dreamed of teeth turned sideways like hail. It becomes routine, like anything does. On dry days I forget to listen. On wet days I hear the bells and am grateful. The red jar grows a crust of wax tears. The old woman, Mrs. Hargreaves, shows me grudgingly other things. Where the roof sings when it's too heavy with water. What a window sounds like when something presses its full soft face to the other side. She tells me not to answer the phone if it rings when it rains. She tells me not to say "come in" to anyone. She tells me to leave a glass by the back door on cold nights, but not to drink from it in the morning. There are rules. There were always rules. I lived elsewhere long enough to pretend I didn't need them. And then one storm, late in the season, the bells stilled. The rain didn't. The house woke me by moving, a subtle shift of weight like a sleeper turning over. In the darkest part of the dark, the phone on the table lit its screen with no ring, as if it had meant to ring and thought better of it. I saw my own number on it. Not a private call. My number, calling me. It made a sound like a mouth filling with water, and then loud with relief. I didn't answer. I turned it face down. A light came on across the street, then another. I went to the window. Mrs. Hargreaves's front door was open. A slice of her house burned like a stage. Rain leaned in across her threshold. The red jar on my table had a hairline crack in the paint. The tapping came on my glass at once, excited, as if I had consented without knowing, as if a door I couldn't see had been opened a finger's width. I grabbed the jar and held it to my ear like a seashell. What I heard inside made my hair prickle. A sound like someone speaking underwater, grammar without words. I crossed the street in the rain because there are moments when you understand that something has run off its track and is rolling downhill, and you are either willing to run with it or you are willing to watch it break everything. The bells on my window frame snapped their threads one by one as I went out. I told myself it was the wind. Inside Mrs. Hargreaves's house, the air was heavy with boiled herbs and metal. She sat on a low chair in the hallway, not fallen but folded, like the idea of standing had become too complicated all at once. She looked up when I came in, and the look again was not kind. It was simply honest. "Good," she said. "You came." "What happened?" "I held it too long," she said. "Or it held me. These things are bargains. They like to change the wording after you've signed." Her hands were blue with veins. One had a small cut that bled like an insult. The roof above us hissed and muttered and gave back the sound of rain. "I can bring it here," I said, holding up the jar like a cup of coffee. "For now." She closed her eyes like a tired mother. "For now," she said, as if the phrase had two edges. She took a breath that was part laugh. "Sit," she said, and I sat at her feet like a child at a story. She told me what to say. She told me where to stand. She told me how to hold the jar in two hands and let my words condense on its sides. She told me the name she had given it, not its true name, which would be a mouthful of rain, but the one it would come to because a human voice could manage it. We said the words together. We said them until my mouth felt numb and the inside of the house tasted like pennies. The rain heaved, as if it were an animal turning. The roof above us let down a thread, a long, gleaming thread of water the width of a wrist vein. It hung in the air like a glass wire, and at its end a small black mouth opened, blind and begging. "Hungry," Mrs. Hargreaves said, without pity. I held up the jar. The thing in the thread tested it. The hairline crack smiled. The red paint flaked just a little, a red crescent like the peeling on a weathered door. I pressed wax with my thumb. I spoke the name she had taught me. I said "not yet," and for the first time I felt it. Not just fear, not self-protection, but the strange warmth that comes when you tell something bigger than you are that it must wait for your permission. It is not power exactly. It is attention sharpened into a blade. The thread of water withdrew, sullen and small. Mrs. Hargreaves watched me as if surprised by the shape of me in the light. "Good," she said again. "You'll do. You'll be better than I was." Don't say that, I said, because it sounded like an ending. She smiled a little, a secret for herself. You'll see, she said. Rain always tells the truth in the end. She slept then, or something like it. I sat in the chair at her kitchen table and watched the jar and listened to the house hold its breath. By morning, the rain had thinned to a lace. When I went to wake her, she was cold, her mouth slightly open, as if she had been about to ask for a glass of water and thought better of it. I called no one at first. I sat with her. The front window showed my house across the street. In my living room, a lamp still burned, though I had no memory of turning it on. The jar looked darker that day, heavier. When I shook it lightly, I felt a slosh thick as syrup. It was enough to make the bells on Mrs. Hargreaves's eaves tremble. I made calls then, the normal ones. People came with faces made for sorrow. They took her away. There were papers and keys. I took the bell tin in one coat pocket and a handful of bent nails in the other. I took a piece of chalk from a drawer and put it behind my ear because I had seen her do it that way. It rains often enough. The jar sits on a saucer near my back door. Bells sing softly when I pass the windows. The drain in the kitchen sometimes says my name, and sometimes I answer. Because it matters in some way, I don't have language for that. Whatever lives in my gutters knows I know it. My rules are on the inside of my pantry door, scrawled in my hand. Do not answer the phone in the rain. Do not say come in. Do not open the jar. Never thank it. Never apologize. It listens. I stand at the front window on wet nights and watch the street run silver and the houses swim in the rain. Across the street, Mrs. Hargreaves's house is dark. A for sale sign tilts in the front yard. Once or twice, between the lashes of rain and light, I think I see a pale oval at the window. Her, still, or me, ghosted in the glass. Sometimes there is tapping at my window that is not the rain. I answer it when it's time and ignore it when it's not. I imagine the new neighbor who will someday stand on their porch with a key ring and a cardboard box under their arm, and that small, defenseless, stupid human openness we all carry like a lantern. I imagine them looking up at me, and how I will put my 2 fingers to my lips, slowly, carefully, because to say it out loud would be to invite every drain and gutter to interrupt. Don't speak. Don't answer. It rains here. It rains and rains. It had been raining since afternoon, one of those Dutch downpours that feels less like weather and more like a decision. Water roughened the parking lot of the Park and Ride into a slate river, turning the painted lines into wavering fish bones and the overhead lights into fuzzy orbs behind a veil. The last bus hissed away as I jogged, and when the driver met my eye in the rearview mirror, he gave a shrug that said too late and not my problem at the same time. I stood under the awning, backpack slung forward to shield my phone. 5% battery. 2 bars, then 1, then the little circle that means nothing. I'd stayed late at the university editing the lecture recording, and the storm had moved up the timetable, chewing through the trains first, then the buses. My partner Sana would already be asleep, and I imagined the delicate argument we'd have if I woke her just to say, hey, maybe come get me from a town you hate driving in a thunderstorm that hates everyone. I opened the rideshare app out of habit. The spinning ring mocked me. Lightning tore the sky overhead, making the puddles show their teeth. I looked out at the 2-lane road that cleaved the lot from the marsh, dark as a slit, hemmed in by reeds that were bending and bowing like they were worshiping the coming night. A car turned off that road and nosed into the lot, headlights feathered by rain. It was a dark blue sedan, the kind you can't date, with the brand emblem snapped out of the grille and a rosary swinging from the rearview mirror. It hovered a few meters from me, engine pulsing. The windows were glossy and black. Then the passenger window slid down a few centimeters with a wet rubber sigh. "You need a ride?" a woman asked. Her voice was normal enough, warm even. I stepped to the window and saw a face in the dashboard glow. Late 30s, maybe 40. Hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes the gray of dirty ice. She was wearing a high-visibility jacket zipped to her throat, the kind road crews wear. The interior smelled faintly like coffee and damp wool. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Into the city," she said. "I can take you close." The rain fretted at my hood, humming on my shoulders. The app still spun and spun, chewing my battery into nothing. "Okay," I said. "If you're sure, I can give you cash." "I don't need cash." she said, and unlocked the door. I hesitated, and then told myself this was one of those moments you'd overthink and end up sleeping on a bench. I climbed in and shut the door on the rain. The sound of it muted instantly, replaced with the intimate drum of drops on a roof just above my skull. The vents exhaled cool air. A string air freshener shaped like a pine tree dangled from behind the rosary, damp enough to look like it was sweating. "Thanks," I said. "I'm at Kinkerstraat." She nodded and put the car in gear. "I know it." The wipers chunked to life. She merged back onto the road, and the world outside became a smear of reeds and poles, rain washing the colors down to the same few grays. Water scored along the side windows like someone was dragging fingernails. "I'm Mara," she said after a minute. "Jonas," I said, shaking rain from my cuffs. "I owe you one. That was almost a disaster." "It's a bad evening for waiting," she said. "Storms change the way roads behave," I laughed softly. "Is that so? You'll see." We sat with that, letting the rain speak for us. My shoes started to steam faintly. I rubbed my hands together, and only then noticed the cold tickle of something against my wrist. A seatbelt tongue, lying in the crack between seat and console, shivered as the car bumped a seam in the road. Without thinking, I reached to move it out of the way. It slid around my fingers as if nudged from beneath, then clicked with a sound like a camera shutter into its buckle. Not mine, the rear seatbelt just behind my shoulder. I glanced back. The back seat was vacant. A child's car seat indentations dimpled the upholstery, but no seat was there now. A damp patch darkened the center of the seat back, like someone with drenched hair had leaned their head there for a long time. I turned back around, guilty for no reason I could name. Mara drove with her hands at 10 and 2, and her shoulders arranged as if braced for a crash. The rosary swung, tapping the mirror with a wooden tick, tick, tick that started to irritate me. The radio was on low, just the white noise hiss of dead air. She didn't change the station. "You do this often?" I asked. "Pick up strays from the park and ride?" Her mouth moved. I thought she might smile, but it didn't arrive. "Only in the rain," she said. "Only at night." I tried to make a joke and came up empty. Outside, the reeds fell away and the road narrowed, crawling up between stands of poplars that rattled and flashed their pale bellies in the wind. The yellow lines glowed and swam. "Shortcut," Mara said. "It keeps us off the motorway." "I don't mind the motorway," I said. She tilted her head toward the windshield. "I do." We passed a speed limit sign that looked melted, numbers slugged by the rain. I knew the area well enough to be sure I'd never taken this road. I would have remembered the way it leaned toward a ditch like a drunk to a friend, or the way the trees' upper branches knitted together to make a porous ceiling that flickered with lightning. The GPS on her dash showed a blue arrow moving over a beige nothing, like the map had been zoomed too far to make sense. "You sure this goes to the city?" I asked lightly. "It goes away from worse," she said. We rolled through a shallow dip, and water feathered across the hood. The engine made a brief complaining hum, the kind of sound you don't want to hear in a waiting car. My throat tightened. I pulled my phone out to light the screen, thinking I'd text Sana just in case, but the screen flashed the red battery symbol and went black, as final as a blink in a nightmare. "Damn," I said, sliding it back. "Do you have a charger?" "Glove compartment," she said. I reached. The glove compartment latch was cold, and for a second my fingertips stuck to it, like touching a frozen railing. I pried it down. Inside was a welter of things. A folded map book with pages furred soft from water damage, a pack of tissues mashed into a brick, a pink child's shoe with a broken butterfly applique, and a coiled phone cable. I took the cable out, careful not to touch anything else. As I shut the compartment, the light inside it illuminated the footwell. The rubber matting was clean, too clean, and slick with a standing film of water that defied gravity by staying put when we turned. Little swirls formed when the car vibrated. I plugged the cable into the port. A tiny green LED did not come on. I pushed the connector into my phone anyway, and it remained lifeless. "It's dead," Mara said. "Not a question." "Yeah, it's better," she said. "For what?" My voice came out too high. "For getting home." We weren't talking about the same home. I realized the road should have joined the ring road by now. Instead, the trees fell back, and we came upon a bridge that wasn't on any route I used. It was squat and concrete with low walls, spanning a channel that must have been a part of the marsh. The water below was the color of a bruise. The rain made tens of thousands of pinprick crowns across its surface, lighting them with each distant flash. A sign tilted near the bridge's mouth, its reflective letters half flensed by time. Old Mill Underpass was what I managed to read before it slurred into rain. "We don't need to go this way," I said. "There's flooding." "It's shallow," she said. "The car can handle it if we don't stop." A shape moved in my peripheral vision, something pale, just at the edge of the right-hand window. I twitched my head and saw only water wrinkling and the slick, vaguely mirrored sheen of the glass itself. Maybe it had been my own face, warped by the glass and rain, but my hands had begun to feel far away, as if I were wearing someone else's bones. The rear seatbelt clicked again behind me. I glanced back quickly. The middle belt's tongue had rotated and was slowly easing toward its buckle, tipped up like a snake tasting the air. The damp patch on the backrest had spread, darkening the fabric around it in a rough halo. I touched the glass of the rear window. It was cold. Wetness condensed on my fingertip, though there was no leak that I could see. The rosary ticked, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. "How long have you had this car?" I asked, trying to make my voice level. "It isn't mine," she said. "I borrowed it." "From who?" "From the road." She sounded almost apologetic. The underpass sloped down, the water rising to kiss the lower third of the tires. The sound changed. Rain on roof and water hissing past the doors and a faint clatter in the wheel wells like pebbles. "Please," I said, surprising myself. "Don't go through." "We have to," she said softly. "If we wait, it comes closer." "What comes closer?" She didn't answer. She turned the radio up a single notch. The hiss filled the car, masking almost another sound beneath it. A delicate, arrhythmic drumming, like fingertips tapping on glass from the outside. I looked sideways. A rivulet, thicker than the rain, was sliding down the inside of the passenger window now. It left a clean track, and along that track something was distorting the night outside in a way rain couldn't. 4 faint ovals pressed in sequence against the glass, dragged slowly downward by something clinging there. When they reached the rubber strip at the bottom, they disappeared. My breath made the glass bloom cloudy. I wiped a circle in it with my cuff. For a heartbeat I saw my reflection, and beyond it water, and beyond that a suggestion of a pale face, hair swaying like pondweed. I flinched back. In the rearview mirror, a shadow moved in the drowned space where a child's seat might be. The car slowed. I hadn't felt Mara lift her foot, but we were slowing, water swelling around us. The engine hum faltered. "Don't stop," I said. "It's heavy tonight," she said, teeth clenched. "Sometimes it's light, it just rides along. Tonight it wants more." "What does?" She gripped the wheel until her knuckles went white and her ring, silver, scratched, bit into her finger. "The one that wants a ride," she said. "It's always the same one, but it wears different faces. It smells like wet hair, it clicks the belts, it likes when people look for it in the glass." My mouth went dry. I realized my eyes had been flicking to every reflective surface, the side mirror, the rear view, the skin of the water, my dead phone. The thing behind the glass in the passenger window flexed again, a handprint dragging up this time, fighting the pull of gravity. A soft click sounded behind my left ear. The middle belt had buckled itself, buckle, then tongue, like a mouth closing. "How do you know all that?" I asked. "I drive here," she said. "I never used to, but the night my girl went off the road, I followed the flashing lights, and the underpass was a bowl. By the time I reached it, the water was full of headlights like coins. After that," she swallowed. "After that, I found roads I didn't know. They find me when it rains. I pick up the ones waiting. Sometimes they're already riding and don't know it. If I keep moving, if I get them across, it doesn't take them." "This is insane," I whispered. "I know," she said. "Hold your hands flat. Don't touch the glass." Water slopped up to the doors. The radio hissed like a breath held too long. Another tap-tap at the window by my cheek. I held my hands in my lap, palms up, like a child at a doctor. The underpass flattened and the car nosed upward. We were almost through. My scalp prickled and I thought, irrationally, of a hand slipping through the vent to curl around my ankle. I looked down at the footwell. The rubber mat's water film vibrated with the engine's effort, making 1,000 microscopic rings. And then, impossibly, the water bulged in the middle like a bubble rising from below but not breaking. A slender curve pressed against the underside of the mat, exactly where my toes had been a second ago. The mat lifted, then subsided without any accompanying leak. "Drive," I said, voice breaking. "Mara, drive." "I am," she said, and she was, but the car fought like something had hooked it. We crawled. The rosary ticked. In the rearview mirror, the halo-shaped stain pulsed darker, and something like hair, long, slick, eased out of the seam where the seat back met the base. It laid itself across the seat like a sleeping animal's tail. "Don't look," Mara said, not glancing at the mirror, not glancing anywhere but forward, not even blinking. But the eye reaches for movement. The mirror caught me again. My own face was pale, lips colorless, and just over my right shoulder, the suggestion of another profile, collapsed and long, like someone had laid their cheek on my shoulder from the back seat and was whispering into the collar of my coat. My shoulders hunched, skin crawling. I made a sound like a swallowed sob. "Hey," Mara said, voice suddenly firm and surprisingly kind. "Listen to me. It needs you to look. It can't cross over. That's the bargain. It needs to borrow your sight. If you don't give it that, we end up on the far side with lungs still ours. What happens if we do look? It shows us what it wants," she said. "And then there's water in our ears and stars in the water, and we think we're remembering something that never happened, and by the time we realize, we breathe in." The dashboard dimmed, brightened again. The engine surged. We climbed. I forced myself to look at my hands. They were shaking, but they were mine. We reached the crown of the underpass and crossed it. The water fell away, and the car rode up onto slick black tarmac that shed rain like a back slicking under a shower. I exhaled, only then noticing I'd been holding my breath. The thing in the window released a long smear, as if sliding away reluctantly. "You did well," Mara murmured. "We're not done," I said. It came out as a croak. "Right, we're not done. Soon," she said. "We have to take the long road. If we go back the way you know, it will be waiting. It knows all the short ways." "I don't want the long road," I said. "I know," she said softly. Neither did I. We drove. The trees here were different, lower, knuckled, clotted with ivy like black veins. The rain came harder, then gentled, then came again, as if the sky were sprinting in bursts. The rosary's tick became a metronome for something primal in me. If it kept ticking, we were still on this side. The radio growled, then smoothed. Occasionally, a word slid through the static like a fish. Stay. Late. Home. But when I tried to seize one, it dissolved. "Tell me about your girl," I said at last, because silence would let the house of fear build new rooms. "She liked mud," Mara said, a raw smile to herself. "My mother said I never let myself be a child. My girl corrected that. She would come in caked in it, cheeks purple with cold, and ask if we could have pancakes. She said if you put enough syrup on things, you can't taste the bad part." She sniffed without crying. We argued that day. She wanted to go to her friends for a movie. I said the weather was turning. She said I never said yes to anything. My chest hurt. "I'm sorry." "I wanted to be right more than I wanted her safe," Mara said. "I can't stop saying it, so I drive. I drive in the rain, and every time I make it across, I think maybe I've put a little something back where I took it." The rear seat belt clicked open by itself. The sound was obscene, like something wet peeling free. I stared forward. The road was a long wound stitched by cat's eye reflectors. My heartbeat synced with the tick of the rosary, then ran ahead, tripped, fell. Something moved in the passenger side mirror. Not a pale face this time, but an entire figure keeping pace beside the car, submerged to the shoulders. Hair spread in a fan, one arm reached up in jerks, as if it were taking strokes to stay level with us. Rain hammered the glass. When we sped up, it did too. It turned its head toward the car, and in that ruined water face, I saw something like recognition. It looked like me, and not like me. It wore my college hoodie, bleached of its emblem. "No," I whispered. "No, no." "Don't," Mara said, but her voice trembled. The figure's mouth opened, and the radio's hiss took on shape, gathered itself, and spoke in a small voice. Mine doubled and breathless. "I need a ride," it said. My hand moved toward the window control as if it had intentions unrelated to me. I yanked it back and sat on it, stupidly. The figure kept pace, its hands slapping the glass, leaving prints that slid and smeared. My hoodie, if it was mine, if hoodies can be shared across worlds, dragged in the water like seaweed. "It looks like what we've lost," Mara said, speaking to herself as much as to me. That's how it charms you into opening the door. I didn't lose myself, I said fiercely. Ridiculous. I'm right here. It smiled like I do when I don't believe myself. The car coasted downhill, and the drainage failed. Water spread into a shallow plate across the road. I watched it rather than the mirror. I watched the white lane line become a snake under it, and the cat's eyes become fish. The figure kept pace and then fell back, its arm reaching, and then the arm stretched impossibly, elbow bending wrong, fingers splaying wide, nails like glass. They tapped along the window like sleet, then stuck. The car shuddered minutely as if something had grabbed hold. Seat forward, Mara said, urgent now. Get the window down an inch, and then up quick. It'll pinch the fingers. Hurt it. I fumbled, almost cracking the glass with the heel of my hand, then found the switch. The window motor shuddered and reluctantly obeyed. The pane dropped a centimeter. Cold rain invaded with a metallic knife smell, and something else, a sour, childlike scent of lake water left in a bucket. Before I could move it back up, the fingers at the top of the pane slid in, cold as stolen heat, slick. They walked along the interior of the door, searching for a lock, for skin. I slammed the switch. The window climbed. The fingers pinched. A sound came through the radio like a woman trying not to scream in a library. The fingers wriggled, and for a half second the middle one slid free, leaving a snail silver trail along the inner rubber. Then the pane caught all three and crushed them. Something thrashed outside. The rosary clacked the mirror out of rhythm, frantic. I felt vindictive and sick. The fingers flattened, then popped, and black water ran down the inside of the door. The hand withdrew. Mara exhaled in a rattle and said, "Good," in a near growl. "Good, good." The figure fell back and was gone, not because it retreated, but because we rose out of its country. The road lifted. The rain eased, if only to take a breath. The GPS flickered and for a moment found itself, a thin thread of blue over pale yellow, labeled with a street I recognized. My heart tripped and then tried to reroute. "Almost there," Mara said, but her voice had the weary note of someone on the last stair with a twisted ankle. Streetlights returned one by one like a child's game of clapping. Houses appeared, pale rectangles with curtains drawn, bikes chained to fences that looked softer in the wet. The marsh had become a ditch, and the ditch had become nothing but a puddled gutter. A tram bell chimed somewhere like a memory. We entered a version of the city I could name. Kinkerstraat was not far off. "Where should I let you out?" Mara asked. "Corner of Bilderdyke," I said, dizzy with the sudden ordinary of it. "Under the awning of the bakery." She nodded. We pulled up. She put the car in park, but didn't kill the engine. Rain thrummed. I reached for my wallet, then remembered. "Cash won't help," she'd said. I rested my hand there anyway, in case the ritual mattered. "You saved me," I said. "It felt inadequate. I don't know how to." Mara's eyes stayed forward. In the glass I saw us double, and in the double behind us I thought, only for a second, that another smaller reflection sat, hair a dark cape. I squeezed my eyes shut, and the impression dissolved when I opened them. "You'll get another chance to pay it forward," she said. "Just, if it's raining and someone asks for a ride, remember what not to look at." I pulled the handle. The door resisted as if the car had taken a set, like wet paper. Then it let me go, and the rain made a home out of my hair and coat again. I stood under the awning and turned back. Mara's window went down enough for me to see her mouth. "Don't wait at the park and ride," she said. "Not in weather like this." "Okay," I said. "Go home." She nodded, and then she looked into the rear-view mirror and flinched minutely, as if a fly had flown into her eye. She looked away. She put the car in drive. The rosary ticked as she pulled into the rain and was gone. I ran home, buzzing doorbells with wet fingers until Sana buzzed me in. We laughed wetly and too loudly, with the fragile laughter of people averting a disaster they couldn't yet name. I showered until the mirror fogged fully. I slept with the window on the catch, listening to rain slacken, almost praying for quiet. At 3:21 a.m., my dead phone vibrated on the dresser twice. No charger, no battery, 2 short haptic pulses. I stared into the dark until my eyes invented green LEDs and red warnings and the pale oval of a face in the corner of the room. In the morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. People do that when they're cold and frightened. I made coffee. Sana left early. The city was rinsed and clean and ordinary. I wiped down my coat and found, On the inner rubber of the passenger side window of my memory, 3 faint tracks where fingers had dragged, as if the mind had its own glass. That night, the rain returned. Not a decision this time, more a suggestion. I made a rule about cabs and trams and coins and walking shoes. I made a joke about buying a bicycle with oars. When I opened my phone, which had decided to acknowledge electricity again, the rideshare app was still spinning from the night before, but it wasn't looking for a driver anymore. A banner glowed at the top. Thanks for the ride. 5 stars. Beneath it, a name, Mara. Next to the name, a date. Not last night, a date from 7 years ago. I stared until the letters blurred, and then the banner dissolved as if it had never been. The app went back to the home screen. I could have blamed a glitch. I did, for an hour or so. It rains a lot here. It will rain again tonight. When it does, I will take the long way home, the lit way, the stupid way. And if someone steps from a bus shelter dusk and says, "Hey, I need a ride," I will say yes if it is safe and no if there are bridges. I will not look for faces in the glass. I will keep the radio on a dead station, and if the white hiss starts to say my name, I will hum a louder song. Sometimes walking back from the tram, I think I hear the wet click of a seatbelt somewhere just behind me, just out of the umbrella's circle. I tell myself it is only drops finding their own path. I tell myself the road is just a road, and the rain is just rain. Most nights it listens. Some nights it doesn't. On those when the window brightens with lightning and I see my reflection look over my shoulder on its own, I keep my eyes forward. I hold my hands in my lap. I do not touch the glass. If the phone vibrates twice with no numbers on the screen, I say to the empty room softly, "Not tonight." I think sometimes of a woman in a high-vis jacket following bad weather like a pilgrim follows relics. I think of a little girl with mud on her cheeks counting cat's eyes from the back seat, bright coins at the bottom of a dark cup. I think of the shape that wants a ride, heavy as the rain and patient as the ditch. I am home. I am not home. I am always crossing the underpass, rising toward a road I recognize. I am brushing away a handprint that the rain puts back and always will.